Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be discussing the Overy Papers number 1, The Obligation and Purpose of the Craft, from 10 September 2013.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have our usual cast of characters. We have Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung from Prince Charles Lodge number 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia. Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton number 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth from King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. Auburn? Yes. Sorry, blanked out there for a second. And I'm Matt Appel. I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243, and we meet in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And today's paper that we're discussing is the very first of the Overy papers, which our regular listeners will know. We talked to Bill Overy a couple of times not too long ago, and have been regularly revisited some of his papers, and there are a lot of them, and there's a nugget or two in each one. It's a good collection. But I guess Steve, you proposed this. I'm waving to you like you're standing here. Steve, you proposed this paper. What drew you to it? What
Well,
excited
actually, I opened the file folder to look for a title that grabbed me, and the obligation and the purpose of the craft kind of just stuck with me as I went through, all the way down the list and down the list. I just kept going back to the first one, and it was like, let's talk about that one for the next episode. Why not? And as I read it, it was like, yeah, okay, it's timely. We should talk about this. He goes on there, and he goes. He reminds brethren in the last lodge meeting that they should or shouldn't forget two things, one being their obligation and the other being the purpose of the craft. Two very important cornerstones in the fraternity. And, he goes on to say, I suppose I found my obligation when I first made it, something that he understood, but did not fully comprehend, which I can see that being how quick everything happens in your first night, and your obligation is kind of a blur until you go and prove yourself proficient. But he goes on and how they're two very important cornerstones, right? And when he next listened to it, so as he goes on about, as he listened to it and as he watched it and observed it, it made more connection, and it made it more relevant. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of how that kind of generally works. As we go through our degrees, there's so much that happens that you can't comprehend it all. And I thought, yeah, well, that's something everybody goes through, so we should talk about that. And really, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of Freemasonry, is that we do the ceremony over and over with every new candidate. So the more active you are and the more present you are in lodge, the more you're going to get out of it, right? It's that old saying, you get out of it what you put into it. And so I thought, yeah, that's pretty darn accurate, right? Did you guys pick up on that? It's at the same thing?
Matt and I unmuted at the same time. Yeah, I think that it's a fundamental element that we have to remember our obligations. I know when I was master, one of the first things I wanted to do was to, when I opened lodge, was to ask one of our past masters to come out to the center of the lodge and lead the entire lodge in our first degree obligation as a reminder, as a foundation of who we are and what we are. And it was a little bit odd, but because our Grand Master was there, and so he was kind of looking at me like, why are you having all the Masons repeat their obligation? But afterwards we talked about it and he understood the idea behind it. And I thought it was interesting to kind of go back to those roots. And even in the article I thought we were going to do tonight, I was mistaken. He talks about, they talk about the idea of going back to your roots as well. And so I think fundamentally we should be reminded of that. You know, when was the last time we looked at or even had to recite our obligations? Of course, we hear it all the time when we're doing degrees or when we're looking at things, but when we actually focus on it.
You know, I often wondered why we never really, nobody's ever really analyzed or reviewed the obligation in any real depth. Not that I've seen, anyways.
Well, my first guess would be that probably if you write it down, you're breaking your obligation that that you'd be analyzing. But I found it interesting. I feel like someone's going to disagree with me just for saying this, but I feel like we can sort of all agree on what the obligation was. Like, it's written in the ritual. We got that. I can agree. We can all more or less agree on. It's different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but it's the same idea. But he puts the purpose of the craft in quotes a couple times, and I found myself wondering, I wonder what he means by the purpose of the craft, because I bet we got 4 guys on this call right now, and I bet we could get 7 different answers if we all answered what we thought it was.
My thing is he keeps saying the obligation, but there's 3 of them. Which one is there's 3 of them.
This is true. There is 3 of them, but really it is all one when you think about it, because, well, at least
don't say it. Don't.
Because in our work, you're on your on your second level, you say all I said before plus with these additions. So it's really each degree is an extension of the first obligation. So your real obligation is stretched throughout the 3 degrees.
Interesting. So does yours doesn't like the first part of your obligation is whatever. I
blah blah
state
blah.
Your name in full, whatever. And then it's followed by, in addition to everything I said before. So is your
Yes.
3rd degree obligation not that long?
Which we're probably shouldn't
Correct. Right.
Because our 3rd degree obligation gets long.
So is ours.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Oh, it's long. Right.
I guess a lot of and this and this and this and then and this and then.
Yeah.
Furthermore.
Right. Furthermore.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's furthermore to what I'd said before.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, it's really one elongated obligation if you think about it.
Interesting. Ours does not have an explicit mention of the previous ones. I guess I would argue that they are wrapped up in the language of the subsequent ones, but it's not explicit like that.
And you can't unobligate yourself from the previous. So I don't know where there's a need to restate.
Why can't you?
Well, if you do, then you have broken your promise as a Mason, and so I don't know.
How many times can you obligate for something? Take an obligation. Obligate. That sounds like a weird word. Obligate. Oblige? No, that makes is that actually the word? Oblige?
I know it's a word.
With me?
All right. So that could be a whole interesting topic on its own, I'm sure. Right. But as Matt says, he goes on and repeats for the purpose of the craft. And what really is the purpose of the craft?
Exactly.
And so if you get down into what he's saying, let me grab that and read it for you. It was It was it's all the little things that this guy. Hang on, the small gnats with Masonic symbols. Hang on, I'm sorry, I missed where I was there. These acts personify the principles of our fraternity, right? The act of doing and giving freely of yourself, then without pretension disappear into the crowd because the good acts were done not for yourself, but for the good of the community spirit, right? And he relates the examples of random acts of kindness for people and in senseless acts of beauty. He gives several examples. Man who plants daffodils along the roadway, you know, his shirt billowing in the breeze from passing cars. And he appoints himself a one-man sanitation service, roams the city collecting litter after in a supermarket cart while others scrub off graffiti from a park bench, right? You know, so it's these random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. I don't know, that I guess depict the type of man that the craft is looking for, or represents the craft. I don't know. I didn't really find how it tied it together with Freemasonry. I really couldn't see that yet in what he was saying. You guys?
This paper is definitely light on evidence. But I don't want to be... Oh, I am that guy. Well, it always comes in and the English professor always comes in and goes, you know, you could have expanded this section, and you know. That was
yeah. But you're right. If they'd have expanded on some of that stuff and tied it into Freemasonry, it would have been nice, right?
Well, I disagree with what he considers to be the purpose of Freemasonry. I think that if you go through and listen to the lectures and stuff, that it's about, and I'm going to say it's education, man. It's knowing things. It's not doing things.
Yeah, and the idea of random acts of kindness isn't unheard of within our walls. I mean, the idea of do good unto all is a core element of who we are, but the specific idea that random acts of kindness are what Masons are about is very thin.
Right.
Again, it is an element, but it's certainly not the only thing.
It's not the purpose.
No, yeah.
I always tell people who are thinking about joining Masonry that Masonry, in my opinion, is not a charity, but Masonry should inspire you to be a better person, and frequently good people are charitable. So it's not that, you know, whatever, if you're a Mason, you have to be a part of the Shriners Hospitals or the Cancer Car Program or the whatever, but by virtue of Masonry having made you a better person, in theory, you're going to say, I should help out those who are less fortunate than myself. So I would not. I guess I would agree with what everyone else is saying, that that would not be the purpose of Masonry. In my
such a yes man.
Not all of us can wear the grumpy britches.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think the paper missed that point, and I was a little disappointed in the end result of that.
So what do we, if we are, maybe this is getting off topic, unless someone wanted to go back to the paper, but if we are rejecting the premise that this is the purpose of Masonry, what do we think the purpose of Masonry is? Should we issue a manifesto of what the purpose of Masonry is according to this podcast?
I just told you what the purpose of Masonry is.
Oh, sorry, Grumpy Bridges.
Yeah, geez.
Education.
Get the wax out of your ears and listen to me, boy.
Education.
Is it just education?
Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Education gives enlightenment.
There's a reason why the lecture in this fellowcraft degree is so freaking long.
So you think it's education about uh, factual things, about mathematics and
as opposed to non-factual things? What TV stations have we been watching lately?
Well, if you look
no,
if
but
you
I
look
mean,
at the lectures, in our 3 degrees, you know, the lessons that are meant to be taught, it's education, right? And we're providing a certain amount of education and enlightenment, and hopefully that encourages the membership who has the desire for more to seek it out, because if they search through the allegories and things that we learn and hear of in masonry, they can't help but get more enlightenment out of it. So,
Well,
yeah.
so I guess, but my question is, so by education, do we mean 2 + 2 = 4? The Declaration of Independence was signed on this day. If you burn hydrogen, it makes water when it combines with oxygen. Is that the education that we're speaking of, or do we mean like fact or truth? I guess is the question. Is it philosophical improvement?
So I think originally, yes, but seeing as in the last 300 years how our education system has improved drastically from the early 18th century.
I was worried you were going to say they went the other way, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, our education up here. Okay, let's go. No, but seriously. So I mean, we know we are. I mean, by the time I hit grade 12, I had learned more in schooling than my father had learned in his 12 years in school. Because my kids are learning more in high school. They're getting further into things like calculus and stuff that I ever got. So yes, I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about Freemason. Like the whole point of it is learning leads to understanding, understanding leads to love. And there's a quote like that I wish I had it written down somewhere and I can't find it, but it's basically is that when you learn about something, someone, somewhere, you understand about that something, somewhat, somewhere, and you are less likely to fear, hate that difference because you understand it better. I'm coming across kind of. So, and I think that's what when we go through the degrees and then we listen to the lectures, I mean, they are saying basic things about, the 7 liberal arts, grammar, rhetoric, logic, blah, blah. But what they're really saying is that if you spend the time to learn about something and understand something, then you get along better. I really wish I had thought this out before the show. But so, yeah, I think that's the true purpose of Freemasonry, is that when we understand each other better, we will get along better and create a better world.
So fraternalism and brotherly love writ large.
Sorry, what?
Brotherly love writ large, not just for our brothers, but for everyone.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of Masonry.
Yeah.
So I think the quote you're looking for, my Googling leads me to the quote of, curiosity leads to knowledge, knowledge leads to understanding, understanding leads to love.
That's the one. Thank you.
By Sabrina Noor. Not a name I know, but a cool quote nonetheless.
Yeah.
So David, I know you've said at least the purpose of lodges is to make Masons. Is that the purpose of Masonry?
No. The purpose of a chartered lodge is to make Masons. But the purpose of Masonry is at its core, like Jarrod was saying, it's just what we call fraternalism, but it's just connectivity among men and among people. And I think mostly among men. I think that's an opportunity for us to connect and to be together and to understand each other. And
that's the key one. Understanding each other, not just getting together, but understanding each other and our differences, and accepting that our differences aren't necessarily a bad thing.
Absolutely. and understanding that people are different than you,
Yeah. And that it doesn't diminish me to have people being different from me.
Clearly, you're wrong, and here's why.
Okay, why am I wrong?
And it's bad. No, I'm kidding. But so I have a brother who's a very good friend of mine who asserted the other day we were having a meal together, and it was, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. I'll get it wrong, but it was essentially that the purpose of Masonry is to get to know God. That the knowledge of the divine is the purpose of Masonry.
No. For one thing, which God? Because if you're talking big G God, no.
Well, I'm so now I'll put words in his mouth. My interpretation of his statement was, the divine, the whatever, God in the many paths up the mountain sense, not God in the God of my church is correct God.
But how can you know something that like this is
Well,
like,
what if we replace the word God with light, or what we might consider as, as the Masonry we call it the Grand Architect, whatever that is.
Cyrus Spinoza.
Who's who?
Baruch Spinoza. read his philosophy. It's actually fascinating. His in a nutshell, his whole thing is that the only truth is, and he uses God because he was writing at a time where if you did use that word, you got burnt at the stake. Basically that everything in the universe is an aspect of and can be related back to, but that God, he is not a benevolent being, and we are not special. That everything in creation is equal. I'm giving a very brief overview of it. But so to say that the purpose of Freemasonry is to understand God, even if you say the purpose of Freemasonry is to understand your world and the world around you, yes, I suppose. But can you just say the purpose of Freemasonry is so that I understand you three better? Four? How many of you here? Three better?
Yeah, I'm so again putting words in his mouth. My guess is that his answer would be that knowing God better, by being closer to the divine, that we would have this increased love for one another and for our fellow man that you were talking about earlier.
But you want to be closer to something further away from all of us. Would it not make it better to get closer to the three of us and understand the three of us, or the four of us? See, I have no idea how many of us we are. I got to stop drinking. But I understand that. I think I understand what he means. I get a little worried when people start going into the grand statements of things, like, because once again, Freemasonry isn't a religion, and we have to be very careful about bringing religious. Okay, now how am I going to not dogma, but certain points of view into it? I mean, admittedly, the whole overarching theme of Freemasonry is the building of the temple, King Solomon's temple. So yeah, we understand that there will be Old Testament language and stuff and references, because that's the story that we're using to create our organization. But to say that is the only story that we should know is a bit dangerous, because it is exclusionary.
So, I agree with you on the exclusionary front. One of the other things I tell new Masons all the time is that you have to keep in mind that the ritual is written by a bunch of white guys in England in the 1600s or before that. And what did they know? In what a bunch of white guys in England in the 1600s know?
Oh no, but it's not just that. Is it okay? Think of it. I think of Freemasonry as like performance art. Like, it's a play that we're doing. Like, the lodge is a play, and we're playing certain parts in it based on the story around the building of King Solomon's temple. So, I mean, they could have picked a different story as the framing art story of Freemasonry, but they didn't. So I don't know if, yes, it was probably because it's a story that they all knew and understood quite well, but we have to be careful of not reading more into it than this is just the story that we need to bring everyone together so that we can discuss the bigger items that we want to talk about.
is that story not about building a house for God? A house
That
for
yeah, it's totally a story about building a house for God. But it could have, if they had chosen the building of the pyramids at Giza, or building the Parthenon in Athens, it would have been the same. We would have had a story about building a building for a god. So it's not. We have to be careful about the god, as opposed to just a god in the story that we have to understand.
I think we're agreeing on most of that.
Well,
yeah,
I didn't say
again,
we're not disagreeing.
Wait a minute, then I have to change my opinion.
But his statement rings true in the sense that Freemasonry is about understanding something greater than us. And the farthest I get is understanding the three of you better than I had, that has made me a better Freemason and has served the purpose of Freemasonry.
Yeah, okay, I can go with that. The whole purpose of Freemasonry is to get to know us three better. Yeah.
Well, that's the purpose of the show anyway.
Yeah. But so the purpose of Freemasonry for someone else might be getting to know three other people better.
Very true.
Because think about it, we're 4 guys from 4 different cities, that somehow we've come together to talk about something without trying to reach through the screen and strangle one of each other. So
I'm glad for that. I feel like I'd be the one taking the punches. So, yeah. So having worked out the purpose of Freemasonry in one short 20-minute block, we on behalf of Stephen and Jarrod and David and myself, I'd like to thank you all for listening and for listening in on our wide-ranging conversation about the first Overy paper here. And as always, we'd love to hear from you, or read your comments on YouTube or Facebook or wherever. So please shoot us a line if you have some input. And with that, thank you all for listening. Goodbye.